We are just 4 days away from Pac-12 Media Day. What can we expect to hear from Coach Whitt and a couple of Utah football players? We're talking about on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is JT Wistcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. If this is your first time listening to us, make sure you guys like and subscribe. We'd love to interact with you guys in the comments as well on YouTube, or you can hit us up on social media at Locked On Utes or at JT Wistcill. On today's show, we're going to be talking some recruiting stuff a little later in the show, including a 3-star linebacker just committed to the Utes. But first, I want to talk about Pac-12 Media Day. This Friday, July 21st, we are going to have Pac-12 Media Day, where Utah is going to have Mark Harlan is also going to be in attendance. We'll talk about him being in attendance there and what we might expect from him. That was a surprising addition that I saw on the schedule. But Kyle Whittingham, Cam Rising, and Cole Bishop will all be available to take questions. So with Media Day approaching, I thought we would talk about just kind of what we can expect from it, what we'll hear, and different things like that. And we're going to have multiple guests on throughout the week to be talking about multiple guests, I should say, too, who are going to Pac-12 Media Day. So we'll talk to them about what they expect to kind of play out, what they're going to be talking to Coach Whitt, some of the players, and of course Mark Harlan about at Media Day. But also, I'm curious, just what are you guys expecting out of Pac-12 Media Day? Make sure you guys let us know in the comments or on social media, because we are going to be doing a Q&A later in the week. So what kind of questions just in general do you want to ask me, or are you curious about getting answered? I would love to discuss those with you guys on a show later this week. But diving into what just kind of I'm expecting for Pac-12 Media Day. Look, they're the most pressing question facing not just Utah, of course, but the Pac-12 in general, I would say overall, as it relates to the biggest question, especially for the future of the conference, is their media rights deal. And unless something crazy happens, and by the time you're listening to this, it's gotten done on Sunday, something I think is highly likely, then that's not going to get done. And I don't expect it to get done at all during the week either. So I just think that we're going to kind of continue to stay in this situation where this Commissioner Koliakov is going to take the stage, and there's not going to be a media rights deal in place. So what I expect is it's kind of like when an NFL coach doesn't want to take questions about a particular topic, whether it's a star player's injury or anything on that regard, they will open it by saying, like, hey, in his opening remarks, Commissioner Koliakov, like a head coach will address like the media rights deal, like by saying, hey, we have a plan in place. I'm not going to be commenting on it further, or something along the lines of that. And if he does comment on it all, he's just going to be dancing around the question. So that's where I just don't expect to get any real information on the Pac-12 media rights deal. If anything, it's going to be positive, right? He's going to say some things like, oh, we're close to making this happen, all kinds of things like that. That could definitely come into play. But overall, in general, I just don't expect to get anything more concrete on that. So I wouldn't be tuning into Pac-12 Media Day expecting that Commissioner Koliakov is going to start it off with hitting like the big red button, and then the Pac-12 media rights deal sign is going to drop down, and it's going to be a big surprise to everyone. That is not how his press conference, which starts at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, if you guys are interested in tuning into that and seeing what Commissioner Koliakov has to say about the conference this upcoming year. I'm not expecting it to start with some crazy announcement. I think we would all be shocked by that in general. And once again, I think this is going to drag on a little bit longer, which it's already been definitely dragging on for a long time. So be curious to see what the resolution to this entire saga ends up being. But we're not going to get much on relates to the media deal, but I do think we get a little bit more from people who are affiliated with Utah. And speaking of that media rights deal a little bit, I'm one of the people I'm very curious to hear about as it relates to that situation, because I'm sure they'll ask Coach Whitt about it as well. Coach Whitt will have a great answer. His is just going to be something like, I'm just focused on my team on the field right now. Like, he's going to shoot that question down so quickly if anyone decides to ask it. He will have almost no interest, I'm sure, in talking about a media rights deal with his upcoming football season, because football coaches usually just, they don't care as much about that stuff, or they don't care to comment on it, I should say. I'm sure, but just because it's important to the university, Coach Whitt cares, but he's just not going to comment on it. He's not focused on that right now. He's focused on his team in the coming season. But one person who is, of course, focused on that and knows how important it is, and that's, once again, Coach Whitt knows how important it is, but he's just going to be focused on other things. And one person who's going to be there, who's going to be commenting on this, is Mark Harlan, I think. And I'm really interested to hear from Mark Harlan just more on his process with how he's approaching the whole situation too. And since he's at Pac-12 Media Days, I expect him to kind of continue his stance and operate that Utah plans on sticking in the Pac-12, like all 10 schools are connected on this. I expect all of that to play out during this process. But it would be interesting if Mark Harlan did just kind of highlight like doing what's best for Utah, just since he's at Pac-12 Media Days, right? Like we all expect Utah and the other remaining Pac-10 members to stick it out in the Pac-12 at the moment, but I am just curious how he'll kind of answer. Like if he will say, if someone asks him, like, if the best option on are you considering all possible scenarios? He'd probably say yes, which just that I think but he'll know how that'll be taken, right? If he says we are considering all possible scenarios, that will lead to some people speculating and saying Utah is looking to bolt and leave for the Big 12, things of that nature. I think that's what he knows if he answers the question that way by saying we're looking at all potential scenarios. That is what people will assume he means by that. So there's just, you got to be very media savvy. And these coaches, athletic directors, and the players have been trained that way as well. So I am very interested to see how Mark Harlan answers all the questions relating to the Pac-12 media rights deal, because he's going to get asked a lot of them, because that is the most pressing mind that every media member who talks to him is going to want to get his opinion on, as one of the athletic directors tasked with kind of helping the presidents make this informed decision overall. But let's get on to the on the field stuff, shall we? So talk about what we expect from Kyle Whittingham, Cam Rising, and Cole Bishop. So from Coach Whitt, I do want to hear just his thoughts on Cam and Brant's health. This is something I alluded to last week. I expect him to say like they're on schedule. I don't know if he'll go outright and say like, hey, we expect them to be ready week 1, or he just might say like they're on schedule, they're at a good pace right now, and we're continuing to monitor that situation. That's more what I expect to hear him say. If he just completely dodged the question, I think that would be interesting, just as we've heard guys like Cam Rising and Brant Keithy continue to keep the mindset that they'll be ready for game 1. And like I said, I'm just curious what Coach Whitt will say. Will he be definitely like, oh no, yes, they're on track, we expect them to play game 1, or will he be a little bit more ambiguous with his answer and be kind of like, yes, they're on track and we're excited to get them back and rolling again, but not give a definitive date? That's what I'm curious about with him. Also, when it comes to these media days, I love just hearing the coaches shout out the players that they've kind of like, they're really excited, whether it's to join this program or they're excited to see kind of break out, whether it's something like, oh man, Junior Tafuna was a monster the last couple of years, but like he's really in for an unbelievable season this year. He's a guy who's just been tearing up in the weight room. You hear about the guys who made the body transformations, or maybe it'd be things like, Emery Simmons is a guy that not a lot of people are talking about right now, but we think he could have a big year for us. Like those are the kind of things that we'll hear Coach Whitt say, highlight and shout out some of the players that he expects to break out, and also just some of the transfers he's excited to get on board with the team too. And the last thing I'm excited to hear from Coach Whitt about is just his thoughts on the program heading into 2023. I think that not just the Utah football program in the short term, but also the long-term future of it. When you are bringing in talented recruits, when you were coming off back-to-back Pac-12 championships, when your goal is, once again, for another year, like it's just three-peating, doing something that hasn't been done in the common Pac-12 era. And I don't even know how long it's been since anyone has three-peated in general. It's just something that is very challenging to do. So those are all things I'm just excited to hear from Coach Whitt talk about. And it's going to be interesting to see, how deep he goes in on some questions, which questions he decides to dodge. He's a savvy college football coach. He knows how to play the media. So I'm very interested to see what kind of things he divulges to the media versus what he wants to keep a little close to the vest. But it's going to be very good to hear from him and the players as well this coming Friday. And speaking of the players, we're going to talk about them and a huge commitment the University of Utah just got in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB action on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/locked on. That's all caps, no spaces, locked on to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. So coming back into this one, let's talk now. Like I said, we talked a little bit about what we expect from Mark Harlan, Kyle Whittingham. Now let's talk a little bit more about what we'll expect from the players who are going to be coming out for Utah, which on last week's show, we're trying to figure out. We knew it was Cam Rising. The question was kind of, will it be Junior Tafuna, Cole Bishop, or maybe even a Karene Reed? I think I went with Junior Tafuna, but I'm excited to hear from Cole Bishop a lot as well. I think this Utah team has so many interesting guys. Just as someone, I've been lucky enough to interview a couple of these players last fall, and they all have such great stories, and there's reasons they're in these positions. They're incredible hard workers who have who just have the right mindset in order to be successful. So it's always interesting to talk with and learn like what goes into that process to be a successful college football player. And these guys have enjoyed immense success, obviously, as back-to-back Pac-12 champions. And speaking of that back-to-back Pac-12 champions, the guy who, if you're in terms of a player standpoint, would deserve the most credit, even though in a game like football, obviously you have to distribute the credit to a lot of different places, could arguably be Cam Rising, because Cam, ever since he took over for Charlie Brewer, has really helped transform this Utah football, not just the team, but the program off those Pac-12 championships I was just discussing. So the first thing, obviously, when we're talking about what I'm looking forward to and what I kind of expect to hear from Cam, is about his health. It's going to be on the first thing he's asked by everyone who interviews him, whether it's in when the Pac-12 media gets him for their segment they do on TV, whether it's just going to be from when he's just doing his general media availability in front of the media. That is what he is going to be asked about. Is it's going to be his health. And I do expect him to divulge a little bit more. I think he'll just not a ton more, but just a little bit more, just saying things like, yeah, I'm on break. On Bill Riley's show last week, he alluded to that he was going to have an upcoming test this week on it as well, and was kind of talking about how we'll see how that goes, and then he's feeling how and things on that. And I don't know if he might want to save that, how that even went for Bill Riley's show once again. So I don't know if he'll say that at Pac-12 Media Days, but if that test that he has sometime during this week, which by the time he will have had it, he will be interviewing he will have the interviews on Friday. So I expect him, if it did go really well, he's obviously going to be alluding to, or just in a good mood, obviously, like, hey, I'm on track to play. Nothing's changed. We're going to hear all of that stuff too. So I'm excited to hear from that. I'm also excited to hear him talk about just how excited he is to work with Brant Kuithe again, because that was something, look, obviously him and Dalton had a remarkable connection last year, and it was something that was so fun to watch play out. But especially after the Florida game, seemed like Brant was going to be the guy to lead this team in receiving yards, and had that opportunity taken away from him, unfortunately. So I'm really excited to see that Cam Rising to Brant Kuithe connection for what will be the third, not straight season in terms of overall, but the third season in a row in which we've at least seen them connect on some touchdowns, which I think is going to be exciting to see. And we're obviously going to see a lot of Cam Rising and Brant Kuithe. So that is something I'm definitely excited to see. And I'm also just excited to hear about his mindset heading in year 3 as a starter. What has he learned? What things is he looking forward to in terms of, like, does he want to improve on anything else? I'm sure he'll mention the explosive passing game a little bit as something, just some things he's learned in the past, anything he wants to sharpen up on his game about. So I'm excited to hear from Cam Rising, especially, like I said, just all the different things, whether it's his health, the connection with his teammates. He spoke on Bill Riley's show about adding Micah Pittman and how excited he is for that. And once again, just I'm excited to hear from him talking about, like, what it means for him going to his 3rd year as a starter, what we can expect from him, and just what he's excited about having all the experience he has under his belt. And speaking of 3-year starting experience, now another guy who's been starting for a little bit for the University of Utah football team is Cole Bishop. So I'm excited to hear from Cole, a guy who is a little bit more, I don't know if underrated is the right word. You could say underrated, but I just feel like Utah fans know how good he is. A lot of people around the Pac-12 know how good he is, but maybe I will say a little underrated still. So I think Cole Bishop's the guy that I'm excited to hear about his mindset coming into the season, what he's learned over the past few seasons. We're talking about a guy who led Utah in tackles last season, which is a remarkable feat from the safety spot. And yes, it maybe speaks to some of the issues the teams had last year, but it also speaks to what a remarkable player Cole Bishop was, in my opinion. I thought he was one of the ones who played pretty good in the Florida game overall. I am going to be watching back the Florida game on an upcoming episode here shortly, and we'll be talking about on Locked On Utes what Utah can take from last year's game and apply it to this year. The answer to that's going to be not much, because it's a pretty different Florida team, and just in general, teams change and evolve when you look from one year to the next. But there's always a couple of things, especially when the coaches are the same. And as we know, this will be Billy Napier's 2nd year with the Gators. So I think a lot of things still will apply just from an offensive philosophy, even though they do have a new defensive coordinator now. So some of that stuff has kind of changed a little bit. But either way, year 3 for Cole Bishop as a starter. Excited to hear from him on that. I'm sure he will be asked about how this team is going to go about replacing Clark Phillips III. So I'm curious about the guys' names he mentioned, right? Is he going to include everyone in there, like talking about how JT Broughton and Zemiah Vaughn have done great things for this program? Is he going to also bring up a Miles Battle and what his addition is going to mean for the team? Is he going to discuss the CJ Blockers and the Smith Snowns of the world? Is he going to shout out some other guys that could emerge? I'm excited to hear how a player thinks the team is going to go about replacing Clark Phillips III. He's going to trust his teammates, but I'm curious to see who he highlights and kind of mentions. And the last thing too, I'm always curious to hear about with these guys is, what is he working on to improve on, right? Cole Bishop is a guy who is still really strong safety, but I think whenever you're an athlete, just in general, you're always working and striving to get better. So I want to hear from Cole Bishop what his kind of goals are on the season, what he's working to improve on, what he wants to get better at, all those kind of things. I think that's what I'm excited to hear from Bishop about. And I think it's cool that they bring the players along for these media days as well, especially guys like Cam Rising who have accomplished so much. And Cole Bishop has obviously accomplished a ton too. So it'll be great to hear from both these guys. It's been a long time since we've heard from, well, outside of Cam being on the radio show for Bill Riley, as we mentioned, but it's still been a while since we've heard from these guys at a Pac-12 media style setting. So that is what's going to be good to see, is both of them on television getting interviewed by the Pac-12 network, Ashley Adamson, Yogi Routh, all the crew over there who do a great job. So it's going to be fun to see how Media Day plays out. And we're going to be talking a lot of Media Day throughout the week on Locked On Utes. So make sure you guys keep it here for what we think it's going to play, how it's going to play out for Utah coming up on this Friday. But one thing we don't have to wait to talk about for Utah football is that they landed another recruit to their 2024 recruiting class. Kanal Lopes, and I apologize if I mispronounced his name, committed to the University of Utah. He's a 3-star linebacker in the class of 2024 out of St. John Bosco. The 6'4", 215-pound linebacker is a huge get for this Utah program that hadn't added any true linebackers, I should say, yet. If you do look at their 24/7 recruiting class so far, they do have a guy in Hunter Andrews, who's an athlete who I think will eventually slide over to linebacker, but at the moment, Lopes is the only linebacker according to the position designations on 24/7 Sports. So what do I think Lopes will bring to the program? Well, the first thing that stood out to me just turning on the tape and watching is just the tackling in space. I think it's exceptional. And that is something with how many great and dynamic skill position players there are in the Pac-12. That's something you have to be able to do at a high level. And I definitely think it's something that Lopes can do. He also does a really good job filling holes. He doesn't get run over by your bigger backs. Really strong tackler too. Does a good job wrapping up. There were a number of plays where he just looked out of position to make a play, and not even like he didn't put himself out of position, I should say, but just the play was like a ran away from him. So he had a very tough angle in order to have to make that play. And he's either able to make that angle or he's willing to sell out and he'll stick his arm out to trip up the running back's feet or different things like that. And his speed allows him to make plays that most high school linebackers just can't make in general. He does a good job taking on blockers or getting around them to either open things up for his teammate. He might take on a lead blocker so then one of his other teammates can fly in and make the tackle, or he does a good job getting to the outside and trying to stop running backs or just turn them back at the inside where all of his teammates are waiting for him to make a play. Also, because of that speed, he's really good in coverage too, can play in zone or could play a little bit of man-to-man, I think, against some of the high school guys. That'll be maybe against certain tight ends he could in the college level, but that's something that would take a little bit of developmental time overall. And another thing cool about Lopes, and is one of the first things you see when you're trying on tape, is he's a guy who's more than willing to play special teams and is able to make plays on special teams too. So that's something I'm excited to see him do with this Utah football team early on, because it's really hard to play and start on a team as a true freshman. It's why you only see the 4-star Lander Bartons of the world are able to do it last year, right? So that's where I'm excited to see for Lopes. I think that he's going to have a chance to come in and make a pretty quick impact on special teams and then give him 1 to 2 years. And you could see him making plays on this Utah defense too, but he's going to be joining a pretty tough linebacker room his first year coming on, right? When you're going to have the the third years for Justin Medlock and, of course, Lander Barton as well. So those are some talented guys he's going to be competing with playing time for, and that I shouldn't even say competing, because those guys are going to be the amount of college football they've played and just how good they look right now. And it's just hard to play for Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley's defense as a true freshman. So that's where Lopes will kind of start on special teams, but I do see him making an impact on this team in the future, not just on special teams, but on the defensive side of the ball, getting some snaps as well. And why do I think he's going to be able to play in the Pac-12 against elite competition? Because not only did he play in California, which I consider one of the 3 best high school football states in the country, but he played at one of the top schools in California in St. John Bosco, which goes against some of just go against guys every week that are playing high level Power 5 college football all over the map. So to me, I really like Lopes as a player on the film I turn on to. I have no doubts he's going to be able to play at the Pac-12 level, because he's going against players constantly that are going to be at the next level too. So a really athletic linebacker who brings the right physicality to position as well. A guy that I think is going to be very successful under Colton Swan when it comes to the University of Utah football program in 2024. So make sure you guys keep an eye on Lopes, as I do think he's a guy who's going to be turning some heads and making some plays sooner rather than later after his freshman season, in which he's able to kind of build some strength after more than likely redshirting. And if you guys are ever chilling on a Friday night, you guys can flip on a game at St. John Bosco too, or just in general, some of these California high schools. Utah does a really good job recruiting California in general. Jaleel Davis from Mater Dei, one of the other top high schools in California, is a guy that Utah added a few weeks ago too. And I'm sure they're going to add even more guys. We know how good Clark Phillips was coming over from California for this Utah football team. So a lot of talented football players come out of California, and Utah's done a good job adding those different talented players. And they've done a good job recruiting in general, which is why we've seen them able to win Pac-12 championships and thus increase the level and ranking of their recruiting classes, or I should just say increase the level of players they're able to bring in, because they've been bringing in higher profile players as of more recently as well. So I'm excited to see what Lopes brings to the team in the future. And Lopes might not be the last player from the 2024 class committing to the team in the near future, because 4-star running back Lamar Radcliffe announced he'll be committing on July 22nd, 2023. And he narrowed his top 3, once again, 4-star running back, narrowed his top 3 schools down to Utah, Oregon, and USC. So a guy who's planning on staying out west is looking at arguably the three best football programs in the Pac-12 right now, and soon to be two of the best football programs in the Pac-12 and one of the best in the Big Ten in a couple years. I do think it's going to take a little bit for USC and UCLA, especially just because of the travel and the jet lag. That's going to take some time for, I just feel like, those programs and those players to get used to. I just don't expect, I'd be shocked if USC's in the Big Ten championship game their first year. I just think when you're making a transition like that, and when you have that many road games, you're going to get players that are really tired, and I think just not used to that. And I just think it's going to take time. And also, of course, with USC, when you're talking about their first year in the Big Ten, it's going to be without Caleb Williams because he's more than likely going to be the first overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft. But either way, as for Utah, Oregon, and USC competing for Radcliffe's services, I think Utah's got a really good shot. When you think of the recent success that Utah running backs have had, right, whether it is Zach Moss, we just go back a couple years to I know it didn't work out for Tavion Thomas this last year, but before that, what a season he had. There's just so many running backs throughout the recent history for Utah football that have enjoyed immense success. And those running backs, at least of a recent history, have enjoyed more success playing at the University of Utah than running backs playing at Oregon and USC, who have still, look, Travis Dye had a good career at Oregon and then last year at USC until he had the injury as well. So those are still schools that are capable of producing high quality running backs. And if you do play for if you go to any of these schools, if you're a running back, you're going to be playing in some big games that matter. And you're going to have an opportunity to compete for not just Pac-12 championship, but honestly, a college football playoff spot with the way the landscape is changing and the college football playoff format is changing, in which there will be a 12-team playoff. So I think that's something big for Radcliffe. We'll break down his game in the future. But in general, I think it's just cool that Utah is in the top three with Oregon and USC. It's just another reminder of the level this program has risen to. 5 years ago, Utah wouldn't really have a shot at Radcliffe to me because, Oregon and USC, those are just programs that were considered on another level than Utah. But you look at the last 5 years, and I actually saw a stat. I forgot who posted the stat on Twitter, but shout out to whoever it was. And we've talked about before, Utah's hasn't lost a home game since 2018. Well, in their last 5 seasons, and this is if we rope in the COVID season included, Utah just in general is 26-2 at home. So that's just incredible stuff. And that's one of the best home records, might be the best home record outside of like an Alabama or a Georgia, maybe, in college football. So just incredible stuff that we've seen recently from the University of Utah football program. And it's allowed them to put themselves in position because of the wins that they've had to be in the running for players as talented as 4-star running back Lamar Radcliffe. So be interesting to monitor his recruiting and see if Utah can beat out Oregon and USC for him. And it's just going to be an interesting week when it comes to Utah football, whether it's talking more recruiting or Pac-12 Media Day. It's just a reminder the season is getting closer and closer. We're less than 50 days away. We're probably coming up on being less than 40 days away as I'm talking about this right now. So exciting stuff for the Utah football program. And it is just going to be great to get football back. And it's something that I'm excited to be talking about with you guys more as we inch closer and closer to football season. And a reminder, if you want to get in on the conversation, sometime this week, I'm going to be doing a Q&A. So make sure you guys send in your questions you want to ask me and just things you're curious to see how they'll play out at Pac-12 Media Day. That's something we're going to be diving into all week long on Locked On Utes. But we appreciate you making us your first listen every single day. Have a fantastic Monday, and we'll see you tomorrow. As always, go Utes.